Want to hear something funny?
Not really.
I left the crock pot on. What?
There's a monolith in the park.
Kind of smaller than I thought it'd be.
Yeah, not really impressive.
Yeah, it's kind of underwhelming. But anyway, the crock pot. What's going on, you cool cats and kittens? Welcome back to another Tower of Power, too sweet to be sour, hunky like a monkey.
Oh yeah!
VFX tutorial. So far, 2021 has been the equivalent of a hold my beer meme, and the United States is currently on fire. So yeah, we're doing great. Don't worry, I don't plan on dedicating any more time in this video to talk about the political climate of the US, especially since I'm kind of writing and recording this script a week before Inauguration Day. Who even knows what things are gonna be like then? Nobody can predict the future. Well, unless you're a writer for The Simpsons. In any case, let's move on to the subject of today's video, which is 3D camera tracking in Cinema 4D. Yes, I'm aware that After Effects has its own built-in camera tracker, but it just isn't going to cut it for today. If you would like us to do a video on After Effects camera tracker, the best way to do that is to leave a comment below. But seriously, go leave a comment. Anyway, if you're looking to follow along with this video, we have also included a link to the assets in the description for your convenience. I know, we're very fine people. To start, I have already made a composition for our shot. I would show you how to do this, but I'm pretty sure you already know how to do this by now. Next, to stop Cinema 4D from chugging during playback, you're going to want to export an image sequence of your shot first. Not only is this good practice, but it also gives you a chance to make yourself a grilled cheese and watch an episode of The Office on Netflix. Oh right. Thanks, Peacock. Once your image sequence is done exporting, head on over to Cinema 4D so we can get this party started. Hold up.
Wait a minute!
Before you start getting into the nitty-gritty, you should probably configure your project first. I wouldn't tell you this if it wasn't important. Hit Ctrl D to bring up your project settings and set your FPS to the same as your footage. Be sure to change this in your render settings too, so everything matches up. I guess you can also select the renderer you're using for this project while you're there. It's not urgent to do now, but I would be very proud of you if you did. Next, head over to the tracker menu and click Motion Tracker. Then go to the Footage tab and import your image sequence. Wow, this looks like No worries, just set the resampling to 100% to make things look less like it was filmed on a potato. If Cinema is giving your computer a hard time, you might want to consider knocking the resampling down to 50% so it doesn't take 80 years to track. Next, make your way over to the 2D tracking tab and click Auto Track. Depending on the resolution of your shot, this could take some time. Now would be a good time to grill another cheese and contemplate about life's many questions. Like, why is a tomato considered a fruit when it's about as sweet as a bag of beef jerky? Once Cinema is done creating your tracks, head over to the 3D Solve tab so we can make your wildest dreams a reality. If you already know your focal length and sensor size, click Known and Constant under the focal length menu and enter the necessary information. If you have no idea what those numbers are, you can just select Unknown and let Cinema figure it out. I mean, that's kind of what you're paying it for, right? Once you've got your camera settings well set, you can now run the 3D solver and play the waiting game. Again, after Cinema is done processing, you should now have a crazy array of colorful donuts. I mean track points. Get quickly acquainted with these little spherical anomalies because they are where good 3D tracks come from. Next, go back to the Footage tab and click Create Background Object. Now it's time to orient your scene. Right-click your motion tracker layer, go down to the tracker tags, and select Planar Constraint. A purple and orange triangle has now appeared amongst all your track points. That's because they went to high school together. Start placing the 3 points of your planar constraint onto some of your finest tracks. If your little guys somehow went into hiding during this process, you can reveal them by clicking the Auto Features layer. When your points are set, go ahead and click Create Plane. This will drop a plane layer into your scene to show you where your floor is. If you want to see if your scene is oriented correctly, turn off your camera, turn off your background, and see if your plane is sitting where it should be. If not, try selecting different track points for your planar constraint until it looks kosher. Once your scene is oriented correctly, go ahead and rotate your plane on the Y-axis until it matches up with your footage. Now let's establish where your object will be sitting in your scene. Turn off your plane layer, right-click your motion tracker, go down to the tracker tags again, and select Position Constraint. Grab the little orange Fruit Loop that appears and place it on the track point that represents where your object will be setting up camp. Now turn back on your plane layer and hit play to see how well your plane sticks to your scene. If it looks like hot garbage, try adjusting the corners of your planar constraint or increase the number of tracks and hit Auto Track again. Be sure to set your minimum spacing to a higher value if you're working with a lot of tracks though, or things are going to get really crowded real quick. Once you're satisfied with your tracking, go ahead and drag your camera out of the motion tracking layer and turn it off. Next, import the object you want to be in your scene and position it on top of your plane. Apply all the necessary materials to your object and get it looking real nice. Once your textures are in place, go ahead and drag your background material onto your plane and set the projection to frontal. Next, right-click your plane, go to the render tags and select compositing. Then go down to your compositing tag settings and check compositing background. Now we are going to set up a sky layer with the HDR you took on set so we can get the proper lighting and reflections on your object. If you didn't manage to snag an HDR while you were on set, well, shame on you. Just kidding, you can always head over to HDRI Haven as a backup option to grab some of their free swag. Though if you're looking for a cheap and easy way to capture an HDRI on set, you can always create a photosphere using Google Street View. I'm not even kidding, that's what we used for this video. Next, create a new material, make sure just the luminance is checked, and import your HDRI. Now create a sky layer and drag your HDRI material onto it. If your HDRI is currently sitting at VHS quality, you can go to the Editor tab on your HDRI material and select a different preview size to wipe your screen down with some Windex. Now rotate it so it lines up with the lighting of your scene. If the colors on your HDRI aren't quite matching, just make your HDRI a layer and mess around with some of the color effects to get it in the same ballpark as your background. Now add a compositing tag to your sky layer and uncheck the scene by camera option, because you don't want that showing up in your render, do you? Next, before exporting, go to your render settings and add an ambient occlusion and global illumination effect. Now hit Ctrl R to see a preview of what your final render will look like. If the lighting and shadows on your object aren't quite up to your high standards, you can just use some area lights to help manually light your scene. If your scene is finally good to go, go back to your render settings and check the output settings to make sure your dimensions and frame rate are correct. Also make sure your frame range is set to all frames, or Cinema is only going to spit out your current frame. You had one job. If your settings are to your liking, head over to the Save tab so we can finally get this show on the road. Select the format you want to save your render as, choose where you want it to live, and hit Shift R to render. If you're using a format with an alpha channel, make sure to check the box for that before rendering, or your export is going to include your background in your render. Once your scene is done exporting, head back over to After Effects and import your rendered shot. Depending on the file format, you might get a pop-up window for your alpha channel. I usually just hit guess and then OK because ain't nobody got time for that. If your render is an image sequence, right-click your image sequence, go to Interpret Footage, and click Main. Now you can set your image sequence to the proper frame rate because by default, it's probably going to be wrong, like the customer who thinks ketchup belongs on a Philly cheesesteak. Next, drag your render into your timeline and make sure it lines up with your footage. Now do a RAM preview to see if everything is integrated properly and your object looks like it might stick around for craft surfaces. Finally, we're going to add some motion blur to your object so it blends in with your scene more. Just duplicate your render layer, add an adjustment layer below it, and call it Motion Blur, or MB, for Manatee's Bowling. Set the track matte to your motion blur layer to alpha and drag a pixel motion blur effect onto it. Now preview your scene again to see if there's anything else you can do better, or you're already over this by now. If you want, you can always add a mask around the important parts of your render to save some precious exporting time. If your shot hits your client right in the feels, go ahead and send your composition to the render queue and hit render. Now take a step back and look at everything you've accomplished. 3D tracking is definitely not always going to be this easy, especially if you're working with really shaky footage, but it's most certainly something you're going to want in your VFX arsenal moving forward. Actually, it might be a good idea to learn how to do that before our next video. No particular reason, just thought you should know. Don't forget to like and hit that little subscribe button so you know when that video drops. I'll give you a hint though. It has something to do with Russians, a girl who looks like a Raggedy Ann doll, and a lot of hallucinations.